Good evening, colleagues. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to start our event. I hope you can hear me well. Welcome to the UNFCCC side event on capacity building towards implementing Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. The mandate after Glasgow has left us with clear focus on Article 6.2 and Article 6.4 capacity building, and countries' NDCs, which have been newly updated, also express a large interest in Article 6. In this context, our side event today aims at launching the UNFCCC Secretariat Article 6 Capacity Building Work Program, as well as solicit views from parties and yourselves on the different components and elements. To start, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. James Grabert, Director at the Mitigation Division of the UNFCCC, for his welcoming remarks. James, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Distinguished participants, it's a pleasure to be here this evening at the UNFC side event on capacity building towards implementing Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. I'd like to thank all of you for your commitment and passion in advancing this crucial agenda item, this issue. And let me give a special thanks to our regional collaboration centers, the RCCs, and our host partners where they are based for all of their support in the past and, of course, going forward in terms of providing capacity building support. Article 6 is crucial as we enter into the full implementation phase of the Paris Agreement. As carbon markets are called on more and more to play an increasing critical role in achieving the 1.5 degree goal. We must reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by nearly half our current rate in just 8 years. This has to be done if we ultimately are going to limit the temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The science tells us this is absolute minimum humanity must achieve if we are to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. However, the combined plans of all the nations, as reflected in the latest NDC Synthesis Report the UNFCCC has produced, clearly shows that we are not only insufficient, but it has put us on a trajectory well beyond 2 degrees Celsius. To that end, here in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27, we must signal a pivot from negotiations to implementation. The debate has moved from the definition of the principles and the goals. With Glasgow Climate Pact adopted, the parties must move beyond the negotiations and focus on the action now. And the agreement on the fundamental rules related to Article 6 are a foundation for a credible and global carbon market, as well as non-market approaches, and can help us move to that action. So this constitutes an important outcome, which makes the Paris Agreement fully operational. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is a useful resource for governments and the private sector and many other stakeholders. It will help in advancing the NDCs. It encourages them to take the lead and cooperate in creative market-driven climate action as envisioned by the Paris Agreement. In the Secretariat, we are committed to accelerate action to assist parties, especially the developing country parties, to participate in Article 6 effectively. Following consultations with parties, we have put much of our focus in designing and implementing the Article 6 capacity building work program, including through regional collaboration centers. Today, the UNFCCC is launching the Article 6 Capacity Building Work Program. This work program will build the needed capacity to participate in Article 6. For example, through identification of the institutional needs, such as strengthening the infrastructure and knowledge base in countries, by ensuring the availability of well-structured information, by enhancing the technical capacities for determining baseline monitoring and reporting, and identifying the appropriate types and formats of capacity building to ensure capacity retention. Those are just a few examples. This capacity building program has been developed through consultations with parties in the course of this year, as well as information gathering with parties. And in the past 6 months, we have organized and participated in a number of events and activities, including surveys. And the Secretariat will be presenting some of the information this evening on what we've done and what we've heard. So let me just say, as we launch the work program, your participation here is a great value. We need your feedback, your insights, your reflections on what's happened so far at COP27 in this area. The discussions and commitments, as you know, that are taking place now in Article 6 are quite relevant to thinking about how we're going to build the capacity of those who wish to use the instruments. The Article 6 capacity building calls for initiatives that are diverse, innovative, synergetic, and resource efficient. They can include practical actions in formal and informal capacity building. And again, you'll be hearing some about this, but we want to look towards focusing on aligning the Article 6 with the NDC implementation plans, assisting parties in understanding the full set of decisions with respect to the commitments that they bring, and assistance in establishing the institutional frameworks that are going to be required in order to be able to implement and take advantage of Article 6. So the Secretariat is scaling up implementation, and including, as I mentioned, through our regional collaboration centers. So please stay tuned for these important events in the coming months. And we look forward to your engagement here tonight and going forward. And I wish you the best of luck in your discussions on this important topic here this evening. And I certainly hope we are all going to be able to accelerate the climate action through Article 6. Thank you.
Thank you, James. It's now my pleasure to invite to the podium Mr. Perumal Arumugam for a presentation on the Article 6 Capacity Building Work Program. Perumal, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for whoever has been staying back after your intense full day, either in the negotiations or in attending other side events or in other zones other than the negotiating rooms. Thank you for staying back. So basically, first of all, what I would like to do is to say that the mandate that has been received by the UNFCCC in relation to the capacity building that needs to be imported to countries, particularly parties, in terms of two aspects related to Article 6.2 and 6.4. So this is a refresher of the mandate that has been offered to the Secretariat to deliver to parties. The first one is in relation to the development of institutional arrangements. As you may all know that to participate in Article 6, if there are transactions that are going to happen internationally and if they become an ITMO, you need to fulfill an institutional arrangement, and the countries have to put together such an institutional arrangements. Many of the developing countries were not very much aware of what needs to be done if it is a cooperative approach. They had institutional arrangements earlier with respect to 6.4. So there's a lot of capacity that needs to be provided in relation to establishment of such institutional arrangements. And also when under the Article 6.2, beyond the cooperation that happens, there's an obligation for the international oversight related to reporting and review, where the parties today, until today, are discussing about the various reporting tables and outlines which needs to be submitted when they engage in cooperative approaches. So the capacity building element that the parties have decided in Glasgow is also to cover on issues related to such reporting. And then the fundamental, if you look at the Article 6, the thing that normally we forget is about the objective that is inscribed within Article 6.1 of the Paris Agreement, which is to assist for implementation of NDC, also to ensure and through the support towards ambition. So there was a clear request from parties that these capacity building programs should also be tailor-made. In order for that, we can support the ambition that is expected to be delivered through the use of this mechanism. And then a specific request towards the regional consideration of supporting the LDCs and SITs in meeting participation requirements. Oftentimes that within the context of negotiations, you will not find everything being so structured well. But you will find in the capacity building, it clearly says that who is going to deliver, through which means what areas to be focused upon and the possible and potential funding towards implementation of this capacity building. So it was a great mandate that came from Glasgow. And then within 6.4, it's again similar to Article 6.2. There's a mandate to also cover the institutional arrangements with respect to participation in Article 6.4. And then also for technical capacity in designing the baseline for application within such host countries. Then distinctively, we know that there are close to 8,000 activities that were been part of the Kyoto Protocol mechanism in the pre-2020 time period. And there was also specific mandates related to providing capacity building on how to help those activities transition into the future Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. So this slide basically provides the various steps that has been undertaken by the Secretariat in order to deliver those mandates. The Secretariat has conducted regional virtual dialogues that has been organized by the regional collaboration centers across all the 6 regions, covering all the 6 regions. Then from the Secretariat, we also launched a survey on the capacity building needs on cooperative approaches that was rolled out to diverse stakeholders of the by the UNFCCC Secretariat, including through the regional collaboration centers, the national focal points, the designated national authorities, the development entities, and also certain like the project developer forum, etc. Based on the inputs that is being received, we as a Secretariat presented those survey results and validated the status of the work plan with parties. So we did kind of 3 validation exercise, one at the SB 56 side event. Then we used the regional climate weeks as an opportunity that happened in Latin America and in Africa to basically check the status of where we are with respect to the planning that we are going forward with respect to implementation of this work plan. And as you also know that under Article 6.4 there is a constituted body which oversees the functioning of the mechanism. The mandate there is also that, as I earlier said, that the scope is quite clear for the Secretariat to provide the capacity building support towards implementation of Article 6, but it asks to seek inputs from parties as well as from the supervisory body, which is the constituted body. So we also have undertaken that to get their feedback, and that has been incorporated within the work plan that we are going forward. This slide summarizes some of the areas that has been stressed that needs to be focused around the Article 6 capacity building. One in relation to the authorization of the ITMOs, the circumstances of LDCs and SITs, how to manage adjustments, basically the accounting adjustments when those units are transferred internationally, setting baselines and robust reporting. Then one of the things that came out of the survey very clearly is that beyond providing a direct support, there's still a need for the capacity in terms of understanding the rules that has been adopted under 6.2 and 6.4. So there was a request for the UNFCCC to develop a blueprint document or a framework document detailing the various steps for the implementation process around Article 6.2, 6.4. And during the surveys, we also have received input on 6.8, but as I said, that the scope currently within this work plan is limited to 6.2 and 6.4. The parties were also requesting additional support in communicating to the private sector, and support is also needed to understand the linkages between Article 6 and carbon pricing instruments, the various carbon pricing instruments. There were also a lot of support being requested from countries in terms of developing the legal institutional arrangements within the country to participate in this mechanism alongside the reporting. There were also requests in terms of undertaking training activities with a practical example of using case solving as an exercise to understand the rules that has been developed within the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Continuing with that, also like one of the other things is about, probably you might have heard and listened from other capacity building events around Article 6 in this same COP, which is the foremost thing is about how does the Article 6 fit into the larger scheme of the country's NDC implementation is a recurring theme that is being coming up. So even within our work program, one of the focus areas that we would be looking at in the beginning is how does the Article 6 actually aligns and fits within the national mitigation activity in terms of crediting in particular environment integrity and sustainable development requirements of the Article 6. And then assessing the required improvement for national registry and tracking. The decision says that every cooperative approach or every country has to designate a registry, or it may establish its own registry. So there were a lot of requests that has come during our needs assessment survey in terms of helping them in putting together how we can enhance where they would be meeting the requirements related to the guidance on registries. Then in terms of national arrangements and baseline approaches, which comes from the mandate, that also has been elaborated by the countries as a specific need towards the capacity building, and then the transition of the CDM towards Article 6.4. So the key findings which I have presented is available in the UNFCCC website, and you would find a survey on Article 6 capacity building needs, which has been published by the collaboration centers. This provides the top 4 that has been identified. Like as I said, the general outcomes of COP26 decisions in relation to Article 6 is still expected to be the big expectation in order for people to understand completely in terms of when they engage in Article 6 cooperation. And then you would see relation to institutional arrangements, tracking and authorization and tracking, and then finally in relation to the baselines. The capacity building work program is developed with an aim to identify the institutional aspects such as strengthening the infrastructure and the knowledge base, ensuring that the availability of a well-structured information is available, which is easily understandable by all the stakeholders, enhance the technical capacity for determining baseline, and also identify the appropriate types and formats towards this capacity building. In order to do that, the capacity building would include a wide array of tools like online courses, like you might have, if somebody has attended a joint event of the UNDP and the UNFCCC in the side event earlier in the day. We have been looking at preparing some courses. We are also in collaboration and conversation with other institutes in terms of providing such courses. There will be training workshops that we would like to plan to provide over the year next year. We've already done, as you've seen, that as a part of the needs assessment, we already did during our regional climate week. So we would also be planning quite a number of training workshops around next year in imparting to participate in the Article 6. We are also looking at developing the help desk and also on-job training and direct technical assistance. When it comes to the different components, the first one, as I said, was in relation to the integration of Article 6 into the implementation plans. So here these are listed some of the activities that is being planned across within the work program to deliver in terms of development of case studies, helping countries in approaches to modeling exercise related to the MAC of mitigation measures where feasible to strengthen their technical capacity. And also in both the mechanisms, it would be helpful. Like this is one of the primary things to see for a country, that if it has to attract carbon finance, it has to identify a sector and measures that are suitable for international transfer and what can be used for domestic targets. If that clarity is available, it becomes easier for the carbon finance to flow in, because otherwise every transaction that goes in, people are with a dilemma whether or not this would be accounted as part of country's own NDC or not. If we have to participate in the Article 6.4 mechanism as part of the participation requirements, it is the responsibility of the country to identify such sectors that they would like, or types of activities that they would like to allow to be used for international transfers. So this exercise that we would like to do is also to help those countries to identify which sectors within their country could potentially be used for the domestic purposes and for international transfer. Of course, it is only like an exercise to help them to make and navigate and to make an informed decision by themselves. In the end, it's up to the country to make its own decision on which sector they would like to do or not to do. but it is an exercise to help them to identify and assist them so that they could use that information when they make a decision. And also within the both Article 6.2 and 6.4, we are also looking at providing tools around identification of co-benefits, and there was a direct mandate to produce tools. We already had within the mechanism and voluntary tool, but there was also mandate to provide additional tools where one could assess the co-benefits related to the sustainable development. We know that sometimes little information is also problematic and too much information is also problematic. So we wanted to see some kind of a centralized repository through an Article 6 capacity building library where to look at the various information that are being available, including published papers and policy briefs, guidebooks, toolkits, and Word templates, including a flowchart to be added within those library. And then I would not get into the sub-elements, which is like in relation to the institutional arrangements, the national governance procedures, and the governance structures which we would be undertaking as part of this program. So in addition to that, there's a specific request, as you have seen. We also are looking at the Article 6 capacity building that are targeted towards private sectors and financial institutions, awareness raising, conducting dialogues, and then once the system, the registration processes, registry functionalities, transparency, and other things which are much more clearer in the rules that are being developed in SHRM. We are still hopeful that we would have them available by the end of next week. So once we roll out the capacity building, we would also take into account of the inputs and the decisions that have been taken in Sharm el-Sheikh in terms of providing those for the aid of countries and private participants to undertake Article 6 activities. Some of you who are from the previous Kyoto world, you would also might have seen about Carbon Bazaar. So we are also looking at developing kind of an Article 6 Carbon Bazaar as a one-stop solution where you would find an information related to activity types that are available, where there is potential funding available for mitigation activities to be supported, etc. So if you put together, like we are looking at three broader elements, one in terms of production of knowledge products, then to provide specific training, and the third one is technical assistance. Within the development of knowledge products, I said it is about the toolkits, webinars, and on selected topics, including providing online courses where possible. And then in terms of training, to conduct trainings around the different regional climate weeks, etc. And then we also wanted to help from 3 or 4 countries from different regions to provide an end-to-end solution in terms of giving an hand-holding exercise towards the technical assistance. The period of implementation we are looking at, it's never cast in stone. It is going to be a plan that will be evolving over time. And we did looking at 2 phases, one in terms of providing an awareness and readiness as a phase 1. That doesn't mean that they are done in sequential, but the initial focus is to make the awareness towards and the readiness for the parties to implement, and then the phase 2 is to continue with the other activities which would run up to 2 to 4 years. And within the capacity building work plan, we are looking also, as I said, that this is one broader area of providing the different timeframes as phase 1 and phase 2. We are also looking at for each activities the different timeframes that we could be associating with, and we would be publishing them soon in the UNFCCC website. And then we are also, we do not want to reinvent the wheel. We know that there are a lot of action that happens outside, so we are also looking at working on cross coordination of initiatives both inside and outside of the UNFCCC. And to identify synergies of activities with other programs and initiatives. And we have already started coordinating with different partners. And there would be one of the partnerships that would be launched in 3 or 4 days, and UNFCCC is going to be part of that partnerships as well. Even though we say that it's a launching event, what we wanted to say is that we have already been doing something, and we wanted to make it much more structured and present to you where we are and what we are planning to do at this moment. And then also we would like to take a regular reviews of the implementation, so we will use the opportunity of both the SBs in Bonn as well as the COP as an opportunity to present in the similar side events to say that how we have progressed with respect to our deployment of capacity building, and we would be taking up those as a regular review and improve the work plan over time. And we also wanted to make sure that this capacity building can be at different levels. So there are things like when it comes to direct technical assistance, it may happen in a regional level or at a global level, but we are also looking at working with countries, as I said, on an end-to-end at the national level. So as indicated, the Secretariat would be scaling up these implementation through the RCCs, and it's a beginning, and we would be happy to assist you over the implementation of Article 6 in the coming years to meet the objectives of the Paris Agreement, as well as we can support the ambition as inscribed in Article 6.1 of the Paris Agreement. Back to you, Mary.
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah. Thank you, Perumal, for the extensive presentation. We will now ask distinguished panelists to join us on the panel. I would like to invite Ms. Maria El-Jishi, International Policy Advisor at the Ministry of Energy from Saudi Arabia, Mr. Kazuhisa Kawakutsu, Director at the Ministry of Environment in Japan, Mr. Luis Panicelli, Technical Advisor from the Ministry of Environment in Argentina, Mr. Albert Magalang, Chief of Climate Change Service, Department of Environment and Natural Resources in the Philippines. Thank you so much. Jacqueline, sorry. And Ms. Jacqueline Rusega from New Zealand. Apologies. Thank you for joining us on the panel. So after Perumal's presentation, we'd love to hear first some general reactions on the different components and the next steps of the Article 6 capacity building work program. But more specifically, where should the focus be on the 12 components? And finally, from your perspective, how can we leverage and what can we leverage from existing actions to maximize the impact and the effectiveness of this work program? I would like to first give the floor to Mr. Kazu. Yes. Please go ahead.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kazu from Japan, Ministry of Environment, and good to see everybody, and also pleasure to be invited to this event. And I have just to say that we are very much looking forward to implementing Article 6, and on this context, we very much welcome the initiative and also the decision from the Glasgow that capacity building is also attached to the rules in this 6.2 and 6.4. In that sense, we very much welcome the efforts made by the Secretariat. And we see that there is a growing need and interest for using the Article 6. And if I just cite to the previous synthesis report from 2021, which is before Glasgow, we saw more than 100 parties mentioning the use of Article 6 in achieving their NDCs. And the latest NDC synthesis report, which was just published in October, I believe, it is now, I think, more than, if I remember correctly, nearly 120 or 130 countries. I think we see an increase of the countries they are mentioning in their updated NDC. So in that context, actually, quite a lot of potential for enhancing ambition. And there are many parties, they wanted to use Article 6 in achieving the NDCs as well as enhancing the NDCs. So question is how to do that? I think that's really the capacity building part is really important in terms of enabling the implementation of the Article 6. And we have seen that maybe from the presentation from the secretariat, Helma mentioned that at least there are 3 areas which to me is important. One is that particularly understanding what Article 6 means to each parties, and also its relation to NDC. The Article 6 is to enhance the ambition of NDC. That definitely related to the each party's NDCs, and then how it relates to the NDC, how the Article 6 could really enhance NDCs. So that's one area that's quite important for many parties. Just saying Article 6 is what do you mean by the Article 6? I think for many people, for most of the ordinary, I mean just most of the people, Article 6, just saying Article 6 doesn't mean anything. I think we need to make it more concrete in terms of action that you are doing, like introducing renewable energy, doing some energy efficiency, and even changing your behaviors to make some emission reductions happen. I think that we need to really to make it more concrete. What do we mean by Article 6? So that really, in the context of NDC, we really need to be kind of contextualizing what do we mean by that. And each NDC has its own objectives and goals. Article 6 really try to support that. So I think that's one area which we think is very important. And next one is institutional arrangement, including authorization. And I think that is the one first step to participate. It is also the participation requirement. So each parties needs to organize to authorize ITOMOS or projects, and maybe how to organize the government. I think that is really the first step. So the government needs to organize by themselves under their own circumstances, and where I think capacity building, including sharing of experiences, what other countries are doing, and then understanding how the institutional arrangement will be organized. I think that area is a really important one. And next area is reporting. Reporting is one step for the participation. So the participation to the Article 6 means you need to report what you are doing for the transferring the ITOMOS, as well as what kind of cooperative approaches you are engaging. That requires reporting. So again, this area is something parties will be benefited by having, what kind of reporting you will be doing, what kind of information that you need to be fulfilling. I think that really helps us. Yeah, the last areas which I think is important is the sort of recording of this, the ITOMOS. So recording of those transferred mitigation outcomes. Again, for this, we need a recording system, maybe called registry. And for many parties, there may be not that such system in taking place. So the capacity building would provide any tools or registries, and how to organize it, maybe trainings to do this management. I think those are the areas that we think it is a first step to do so. That enables more opportunities, more opportunity to investment, more opportunities for the projects, engagement in the private sectors. I think that's really important areas. So I will stop here, and then I think we see those 3 areas are really important, and then I hope that the Secretariat could really facilitate to implement those necessary elements. Thank you.
Thank you, Kazuo. I particularly on not many countries or parties know what Article 6 means, but parties have some capacity already in formulating NDCs, understanding a bit of the planning, and it's important to see how Article 6 can actually move the implementation of the NDC forward, and that linkage, that awareness that Perumal also mentioned in his presentation is important in order to move into the technical aspects, which is continuous and iterative. As countries learn more and understand more, the better they know how to use Article 6 as a climate finance instrument to push climate action. So thank you, Kazu. I would like now to give the floor to Maria. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I'm not going to be as thorough as my colleague Kazu, but just general remarks on capacity building and the implementation of Article 6. I think that what we really need to remember is that as the UNFCCC has been progressing from Kyoto Protocol, where we know there were some commitments on some countries, and some countries were seen as more of providers of carbon credits, while some countries were seen as sources of demand. The Paris Agreement really changed the environment that we're operating under, because everybody has a commitment, everybody is party to Paris Agreement, and everybody is trying to work through towards the goals of Paris Agreement, keeping the temperature to well below 2 degrees while pursuing efforts for 1.5. You're trying to make finance flows towards sustainable development. You're trying to adapt and build up your climate resilience. These are all the 3 pillars of Paris, and Article 6 is operating under this umbrella. And so while I think the spirit of Article 6 is quite beautiful because it's in cooperative approaches, it's also very much constrained in that box of we all have commitments and NDCs that we need to meet, but we'd also, if we choose to do so, like to cooperate with each other. And the text that was adopted in Glasgow in COP26 is gibberish to most human beings, and that's something that's completely understandable. It took me a while to be able to speak the language of the Article 6 room. It's not something that is widely known or understood. And so that was capacity building in and of itself. So if you've even attempted to read the text, my congratulations to you. And that's coming from someone who's actually negotiating it and working on developing these tools and these implementations. And so we go out to the countries, the hosts, where the actual implementation and interaction with all of these rules that we're putting in place are not things that are done perhaps by the negotiators who understand the difference between a transfer, a forwarding, and a first transfer, but rather by normal people who do their normal jobs, and suddenly they're being asked to please implement this article. And this is where the capacity building program by the Secretariat really plays a big role, because you're able to have a central place for people to know this is where I can go to ask for help. This is the resource that I can seek to make sure that when I build up my capacity, I'm understanding the way that I need to do these in the correct way, and that I'm not misinterpreting it and perhaps jeopardizing my ability to achieve my own NDCs. The fact that we're all party to Paris, at least for me, means that I trust that everyone is trying to achieve the NDCs that they've set out for themselves, and no one is deliberately going to try and ruin the opportunity for them to achieve the goals they've set out for themselves. And so how do we do that in an Article 6 world where you might be exchanging emission reduction credits between one country and another, or between one private sector and another, and how do these things fit with each other? It's not something that's easy to understand or keep track of, and again, that's where the capacity building comes in. There are extensive reporting requirements under Article 6 because we want the system to be robust. We want it to make sure that it was ambitious enough, that it would be robust enough in terms of environmental integrity. And so there's a lot that the project developers need to be able to report on. There's even more that the host party needs to report on, because at the end of the day, again, the environment is different for this. The host is very much involved. The countries that house these projects are very much involved. And so there needs to be a common understanding of how do you fill out these reports? How do you provide this information so that the pluses and the minuses at the end of the day add up in a way that we can see, are we actually moving forward towards our goals under Paris or not? And there's a huge role for the capacity building program. If you've been listening to the conversation in the rooms of Article 6 over the past week, I'm sure you've heard the word capacity building several times. I wouldn't even attempt to count it. I would predict that the program would be even bigger next year, because it's actually a real need. We are trying something that we've never tried before, and it's a learning experience for everyone, and everybody is building up their capacities. So I'm very happy to see the Secretariat pursuing efforts, and really hoping that the efforts will expand and the teams will enlarge enough to be able to have very wide outreach so that everyone can participate in an equitable way. Thanks.
Thank you, Maria, for your intervention. And I really like the point where you said that countries can now know with the capacity building program where to go, and this information will empower their decision as to how to implement their NDCs. And your intervention actually is kind of building capacities in a way by listing all the different elements that a country actually needs to do from the reporting side. Countries do have some experience in reporting, but now there will be a layer added to that. So building also on that existing capacity infrastructure that exists in countries when it comes to UNFCCC processes such as the NDC, the BURs, then in a later stage BTRs, and how the Article 6 fits into that, into roadmaps and into finance strategies. So thanks a lot, Maria. I would now like to give the floor to Luis. Please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, and good evening. I much appreciate also the words by Kasu saying that Article 6 is difficult to understand even for the climate change community, and we are supposed to be Article 6 experts, but even for us it's difficult to explain to the normal people what is Article 6 about. So I think much appreciated also the capacity building for the expert to put in simple words, and especially for Maria, to give him this simple but clear explanation of what is Article 6, in the meaning also in the context also of the Paris Agreement. So this capacity building program from the Secretary is much appreciated, and it also shows the challenges that we have ahead on understanding the role that carbon markets or Article 6 in general, because we are speaking also about no-market approaches, can play in the implementations of the NDCs and the enhancement of the mitigation and adaptation actions in the countries. And in our view, this should be also tailored, because this is recognizing also the differences that there are in the national circumstances and the capacities of different countries to implement Article 6. So it's a tailored approach that maybe it should be the best way not to implement the capacity building programs, to recognize the differences in the different capacities and circumstances of the different countries. And maybe go through 4 different points on maybe the different big issues on capacity building as I see it. First, at the policy level, that it has to do on how we use Article 6 inside the Paris Agreement, and the intention to use cooperative approaches for completion of the NDCs, but also for enhanced mitigation adaptation. It has to be with ambition, and I think this is reflected on one of the slides that was presented on where are the main priorities is just to understand what is Article 6 and what we can do with Article 6 now inside of the Paris Agreement. So we see this as one of the main priorities for understanding this role in the implementation. No? The second issue that is has to do with the integrity. With the integrity of the mechanism that we are implementing, not only the environmental integrity but also the safeguards that should accompany the implementation of the mechanism. First layer is the institutional arrangements and the legal issues. The rights of carbon, there is maybe a lack of clarity on the rights. No? So this is one of the other issues that we understand need also more understanding, also to have a capacity building program on this. And then there is the technical level. No? The technical level on how we assure the tracking of the units and how we can implement our national MRV systems to be able to participate in the mechanism. No? This is in general. Then you have the specificities of each of the mechanisms. No? You have the 6.2 that has some type of arrangements and have some type of tracking systems, 6.4 and 6.8. So there's a lot on the table to be processed on the implementation of the Article 6. So the capacity building is really much appreciated. No? So maybe I stop there and I pass the floor. Thanks.
Thank you, Luis. I think you also alluded to one very important point, which I think across the board in climate action, that countries have very different capacities and starting points are very different, and capacity building program also are supposed to be cognizant of that. Some countries already have some built-in capacity for other elements, and it will be faster for them to pick up these new elements in participating in Article 6, and some of them will be slower to respond. So catering for those different situations is also important. And also the element of integrity is very important. So thank you for your intervention. Jacqueline, I want to turn over to you for your thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I don't want to reiterate the points that my colleagues before me have made, so I'll try and focus on a few different things. Number one, indicating that our negotiations this week alone really demonstrate the breadth of what we're building with this market system, how complicated it is, how many elements it encompasses. And much of that burden of the partnership of cooperative approaches ends up falling on developing countries most of the time. So capacity building is key to enable equitable access to carbon markets under Article 6. And I say equitable, recognizing that using markets is 100% voluntary, but capacity shouldn't be the barrier to be able to engage. And to us, that means that the capacity building has to extend from the inception of the idea to engage in markets all the way to the implementation side of it. So this means a strong policy foundation, understanding how this relates to a nationally determined contribution, not just to 2030, but a long-term decarbonization pathway, right? We have to be able to think long-term about what we're engaging in. And it also includes, as my colleagues before me have noted, the very complex technical know-how to implement the infrastructure, the reporting, the review processes that encompass participating in markets. And this information is incredibly empowering, as we really believe that using markets has substantial benefits, both to increased emissions reductions, but also to contribute to sustainable development across the world. And for this reason, we really also advocate for a country-driven and regionally driven process, because as was just noted, countries and regions have different starting points, they have different capacities. And Latin America has a different perspective than Asia Pacific will have, and so we view this as a key element of the capacity building work program. And we view the secretariat using, for example, the RCCs as a valuable element in being able to address this element. And this sort of brings me to my last point on leveraging existing infrastructure and processes for capacity building. Number one, yes, to avoid duplication of processes and overlap, but also because there is already a lot of good work underway for capacity building. And this is across the spectrum, right, from the policy foundation side that I mentioned to the technical know-how for implementation. And the UNFCCC is a good convener. They have very good, strong convening powers, and we think that this capacity building work program will add substantial value to the market, to standing this up with integrity, as we mentioned, with trust in the market, and with that inclusivity that I mentioned about reducing the barriers to entry. And so that hopefully together we can cooperate in a mutually beneficial manner that we all understand exactly what it is that we're engaging in. I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for making the point of Article 6 being a complex issue, but I think a complex issue starts becoming less complex when we break it down, and the capacity building program does exactly that. It breaks it down into smaller components, many phases, the reiteration, and the regionalization of the support is also important, like breaking it down into smaller steps and understanding, like you said, that this is a process. This is not a one-time situation. This will be an iterative and continuous process. So thank you. I would now like to give the floor to Albert. Please, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much, and pleasant evening to all of you. It's my pleasure to be invited as one of the panelists here with my co-negotiators on Article 6. Anyway, when Perumal was presenting the slides on the capacity building program or this this launch, I was thinking of what kind of capacity building do we need this time, because all of my life is as a DNA of the CDM has been, I was so